very warm welcome to episode 7 of my Christmas room box series. Now in today's episode we're going to be adding the panelling or wainscoting around the walls of the room. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a couple of ways that you could do your panelling. Now the way that I'm going to be doing mine is similar to how I did my flooring. So I'm going to be cutting templates for each of the walls from cardboard and then using the strip pieces to create what's called beadboard panelling. I've then got some rather nice moulding here which I shall place around the top. Another way you could do it is cut, rather than using cardboard, actually cut panels from a sheet of wood. So obviously it wouldn't be that tall, but you would just attach a piece of wood to the wall, and then you could either use pieces of strip wood to create squares, or you could actually use a square which you would then bevel on each edge and create some nice mouldings in that way, and that would be called more of a classic moulded style. But do have a look at Google Images if you'd like to do something different. I'm going to be keeping mine fairly simple, but there are obviously some lovely moulded designs that you could recreate in your room box. So for my templates, I'm just using cereal packet card, and I've cut it obviously to the length of the wall, but to a height of 60mm or 2 3/8 of an inch. But obviously whatever height you do it is up to you. But I just started over here by the fireplace and I thought that looks quite a nice height against the fire surround there. So maybe that's a good place to start and just see where you think it looks nice. You don't want to go up too high. And then what I've done, again, I've numbered the pieces on the back so I remember where they go. But as you're going around, just have a think about how you're going to place it. So we're not going to worry about mitre joins with these. So if you imagine the first covered little piece will go at the back there, and then when we attach this front piece, we want it to cover the side of that back piece. So the pieces that are sort of towards the front or facing towards the front, we want to have the nicest edge. So always just cut a little bit more on each of those templates. So over here with the bit that goes against the wall there, I cut that piece first again, and then this will butt up against it with the strip attached. So the strips are quite thin, they're about 1mm thick. So you'll need to take that into consideration. But having said that, I have just left a little bit overhanging at this end, and because I'm just using card and then the thin strip, which is here, you can see how sort of pliable it is. If I've got too much overhanging, I can just trim a little bit off at that end, so again we keep the neatest end at the front of the room box. If you're going to be using something thicker, or you're going to be using the other design and do like your classic moulded panels, then you will need to cut it to the exact size. And if you're unsure about any of that, then you could just do one panel at a time. You know, actually cut your template, fit your panel in. You don't have to paint it, but then you can cut your next piece to the exact size and work your way around your room like that. So I've done the same thing here as well. So I've sort of left a bit there on the front piece, about 1.5 mm, so that will overlap that little side piece as well, and then we're not going to see the edges of whatever, you know, is at the side of the chimney breast there. So always just think the neatest edge as you're sort of looking into your room box, and that's what you want to be seeing from the front. Okay, so I've got my templates. As I said, I've numbered them again 1 to 7 so that I don't get in a muddle when I'm putting them back in. So now I can begin attaching the strips. Okay, so as I know that all of my strips are going to be 60mm long, I'm just cutting myself quite a few here. So I think I've got enough now for my first panel. I'll just do one more. So I'm just putting a little pencil mark on there and then using the straight part of my guillotine to cut. That makes it really easy, like that. So I'm going to make a start now actually gluing these into place, and then I can cut some more for the next lot of templates. Okay, so I'm going to apply a bit of glue to the template. I'm not going to go all the way along, I'm probably do about 1/4 at a time, otherwise your glue may dry before you get there. Go like that. And then when you cut anything by hand, even using your guillotine, there is always a chance that some of your strips are going to be slightly out. So what I'm going to do here is put a piece of strip along the bottom of my template and line all of my pieces up against it. And that way you'll know you're getting at least one straight edge. And then if we've got anything overhanging along the top, we can trim that off at the end. So press that into place. Put the second one on, and I just want to leave a very, very small hairline gap along there, just so that you can actually see that it is separate pieces and not just one piece of wood. I still want to be able to see the grooves between them. So work your way along. Okay, so I'm now at the end of my row and I haven't quite got a full strip there, but I'm going to stick that into place anyway. And then, as I do with the flooring, once that's completely dry, we'll turn it over, trim not only along the end but also along the top. And you can see there what I was talking about. So in some places I've cut just above the pencil line, so I've got a bit of a wiggly line along there. But again, as I say, as long as you get one straight edge, and this bottom edge will sit nice and straight along our skirting board, then we can trim off the excess at the back of the template once it's all completely dry. So I'm actually just going to put a piece of kitchen towel on top of that now and weigh it down with some books and make a start on my next template. Okay, so all of my templates are now covered. The first one has dried, all of the others are being weighed down under books. So I'm now going to begin trimming this first one. So I've just got a little strip at the end there to trim off, and I'm going to use the rule rather than just cutting alongside the card, and that way you'll keep it nice and straight. And then just along the top there, you can just see where a few of the strips are coming over. So again, I'm going to use my rule just to trim those off. So I've now got a piece with a nice straight top and bottom edges. So I'm going to try that piece into place. And that's actually a really nice fit, so that comes just to the edge of the skirting board there and isn't overhanging the groove for the acetate. But if you did need to trim any off, trim from that end that's going to be hidden. That way you'll leave a nice full piece there so that it won't look odd once we actually complete the room. So that's my first piece done. I'm now going to give this a gentle sand just to get rid of a couple of little pencil marks that I've still got at the top and to make sure that the entire piece is flush. Once you've sanded the piece, don't forget to use a soft brush to remove the sanding dust. Okay, so all of my pieces are now trimmed and fitted into place. So, as I spoke about earlier, you need to allow for the pieces at the back before you trim your pieces that are closer to the front of the box. So for example, put that piece into place flush at the back wall there, and then line this piece up so that you're taking into account the thickness of that back piece before you then trim along this edge. And do that all the way around. So with that piece there, you need to allow again for the back piece and then trim it to fit alongside the edge of the chimney breast. And then they're not all holding themselves in, but then with this piece, you would cut it so that it's covering the edge of that piece at the side of the chimney breast. So that will be hidden. If I just pop that back up into place. Like I say, they're not all holding themselves in, but I just hold those in there. So you see what I mean? So the back edge of the back piece is then hidden by this front piece, so you're just overlapping it slightly. Same obviously at the other side, And then what I've done in there, and I just need to get my tweezers to actually show you, that's obviously my front and side piece, and then I've just cut a tiny piece, which isn't on cardboard, just to fit into that little area at the back there. So thin strip, and then I've just trimmed out the area for the skirting board there. And that was just because even though I added that paint, I didn't allow that my panelling would come higher up, so you can still see some of the wallpaper there, and it doesn't look quite right. So I've just cut, like I say, a thin strip to slot in there, and that really sort of neatens it off. Okay, so I'm going to prepare the rest of these pieces now for paint, but then I actually want to get the moulding cut, or the dado rail, before I then paint the pieces, and again I can do that all as one job. Okay, so with the moulding, or the dado rail as it's also known, we're going to fit it the same way as we did for the skirting board. So for our first piece we've just got a nice straight piece, and then as we work our way around we'll start cutting the mitre cuts into the end of the pieces where we need to make the joins. So the first thing to do is have a look at your piece of moulding and see if it's got a top and a bottom. And this has, so it's got like a wider pattern at the bottom there, and I'm going to have that at the bottom. So you could have it the other way round if you wanted to, but I think it looks nicer with that sort of thinner double groove at the top there. But whichever way you decide upon, just remember that that's how you need to keep it all the way around. So I've actually already cut my first piece. Now I haven't got my panelling in place, as you can see, but the walls should be the same all the way up. If for some reason it's different in your room box, then you might just want to slot your panelling into place and just trim each piece with the panelling in place. I'm not sure why it would be, but just in case, just have a think about that if you do need to actually cut it with the panelling there, if you're doing something different to what I'm doing. So that's the first piece, and then with the next piece you'd cut your angle using your mitre block and saw. Okay, so I've cut each of my pieces, and again I've put a number on the back. Now I'm not going to go into great detail with how to cut the pieces because, as I say, it's exactly the same as how we did the skirting, which I covered in episode 6, so in the last episode. But I would just say to remember which way around you're going to be having your moulding as you cut your mitres, and as you're measuring your pieces against the wall, just do that little pencil line with a rough indication of where the mitre needs to be cut, and then when you get back to your mitre block and saw, you'll know exactly where you need to cut. For sort of measuring in all these little areas, you can lay your pieces along the top of your mantelpiece, so you know you can lay it across there and get an exact measurement like that, rather than having to try to measure actually in the place where it's going. And as I say, if your box is sort of all square, then that will work perfectly. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is gently sand each of these pieces, remove the sanding dust with a soft brush, and then these pieces will all be ready to paint along with my panelling. Okay, so I've attached all of my pieces to my painting sheet, and again I'm going to apply 2 coats, and I'll sand gently after each coat has completely dried. So I haven't got much paint left in my pot, so I'll use this up and then have a refill. But hopefully I'll be able to get quite a few bits done with what I have got in here. Okay, so that's the second coat of paint done on all of those pieces. I'm now going to leave those to dry, and whilst they're drying I want to make a start on adding the brick paper to the outside of the room box. So to paper the outside of my room box, I'm going to be using this embossed brick, which is the same one that I used for inside the chimney breast. And this one is code number DIY 761B, and it's a weathered brick Flemish bond. And it's got a lovely sort of random effect to it. And if I turn it over, I can just show you how that is embossed. So you've got that sort of lovely line of cement between the bricks. Now I'm actually only going to be applying this to the sides of my room box, so the back I am actually going to leave plain, and this is where I'm going to be attaching my wires. So the wire that will come out from the back of the fire and from the Christmas tree lights, and then the other lamps that I've got to go in there are actually battery operated, so I don't have to worry about those. But I know that where I'm going to be placing my room box in the living room, the back is going to be against a wall, so it's not going to be seen, so it doesn't matter if it looks a little bit messy round there. But if you are going to be having it somewhere where the back is visible, then you might want to have a think about papering the back of yours. In my case, it really is going to be the backstage area. Okay, so what I've done then is lay my first sheet of brick paper alongside the side like that, so it's flush against the front of the side there, and then I've just really carefully creased it around to make a line of where I need to cut along the top and then along the back. But as you're doing that, make sure that it's staying flush along the front there, otherwise your line's going to be too far back or too low down. And then what I do when I've actually made that line is just cut slightly above or slightly behind, so that you're cutting the piece larger than you'll need it. And then you can always do a little bit of trimming, but if you cut it too small, then obviously you'll need to recut and you would have wasted a sheet of paper. And also just to mention that this paper is available in my Etsy shop. It comes in this lovely Flemish bond. There's also a yellow and a red, and I'll pop links to those in the description box below. So what I then like to do is fold the paper along the lines that I've made so that you get a nice sharp crease in there. Do that along both folds, and then just double check the size again up against the side of your room box before you actually make the cut, and then you can make your cuts. And I always do it from the back just because the creases are easier to see on the white. And as I said, I like to cut just to the side of the creases so that I'm actually cutting it out slightly larger than it needs to be. Okay, so as there's nothing inside the room box at the moment, I've stood it on the side, and I'm going to apply the glue directly to this side. Pretty sure I've got enough left in here. And I'm just going to spread that out with my brush. So make sure you get that all along the edges. And then lay your piece into place. So you've got that nice flush edge along the front there. And then smooth that on. And this is that lovely sort of thick paper that you don't have to worry about it wrinkling. Just lays on really nicely. And then if you have got any sort of little overhangs, once that's completely dry, we can just turn the box onto the side and trim those off using our craft knife. That actually seems to be fitting really nicely on there. So it's always a good idea to trim just on the outside of your creases. Always better to have too much there than not enough. Okay, so do the same thing again at the other side. Okay, so that's both sides now papered, and I think that looks really nice and goes nicely as well with the colouring on the inside. So what I've also done is paper the top piece, again using these embossed dark roof slates. I've just stuck that on there along two straight edges, and then once this is dry, and it's nearly dry now, I'll trim off around the edges. But when you're doing that, just remember which is the back of your top piece. So your tiles would obviously, you know, come downwards like that. And you can tell when you're looking at the pattern that they have got a top and a bottom to the tile. So just make sure you put them on the right way around if you're going to use tiles. My initial thought with the roof was to perhaps put something like, not cotton wool, but something that would look like snow. But then I sort of decided against that because I thought that might get quite dusty and it's difficult to keep clean, so I decided to stick with a paper. But that's another idea, depending on, you know, where you might store your room box after Christmas. So I'll now get this trimmed off. So whenever you're trimming, always make sure you've got a nice new blade in your knife so that you don't snag the card. And always press down firmly on the piece that you're trimming from. Like that. So I'm now going to try this piece into place. So that sits really nicely on there as well. I've got a little bit of touching up to do. I noticed I've removed a little bit of the paint along the side there, and then I also like to colour in the front edges of the paper, and for that you can either use your paint again or just a coloured pencil or something like that, just to get rid of those white edges. Okay, so what I also want to do whilst I'm still able to turn the box upside down is attach the acetate. So I've got a piece of 0.5mm acetate sheet here, and I sell this in my Etsy shop in A4 sheets. And what I've done here is just cut a bit that's, as you can see, a lot larger than the actual door. Now to glue that into place, I'm going to be using the Deluxe Materials glue and glaze, and I'll pop a link for that below. So what I'm actually going to do is just put a little bit onto some of these panes, and I don't know if you remember from an earlier episode, but my panes were just trying to sort of pop inwards a little bit. I don't want to touch them because they're very fragile, but if I put a bit on the panes, then put the acetate on, I can press the thin strips against the acetate, and that will actually hold them in place and make them a little bit more sturdy. And just a couple of times as I've sort of been doing things, I've knocked a couple of the pane divides out. So I do want to get these attached. And then what I'll do is actually put a bit of masking tape around the edges of the acetate onto the box to actually hold it into place that way. And that will hold it there nice and firmly then. So this tube has got this really nice sort of fine applicator tip. I'm just going to dot a little bit on like that, and I'm going to divide that out now with a cocktail stick. Just sort of spread a little bit onto the other panes like that. And this, if it goes onto the acetate, it doesn't fog the acetate. And it's quite good because you do only need a tiny amount. So I'm just going to spread that out a little bit, like that. And then lay my acetate on top. Just get rid of the dust. Lay that on there like that, and then just very gently press the strips against it. Just turn that round so I can get my hand in there, like that, and that will hold those more sturdy in place. And I'm now going to put just a bit of masking tape around those edges as well, and because this is sort of like my backstage hidden area, like I say, I'm not worried if it looks a little bit messy around here. A piece along there as well. Turn that off. I'm also going to be sticking a nice sort of snowy street scene image at the back here as well, which I can then light up from behind. But for now, that's the acetate in place. Okay, so all of my panel pieces are now dry, and I've sanded those and they're now ready to glue into place. So I've just sort of laid them out in the room in number order, and I'm going to work my way around the room, gluing them into place and gluing the back wall pieces in before the front pieces, as we spoke about earlier. So that's the panelling in place, and I'm now going to attach the dado rail. Okay, so that's all of the panelling and mouldings in place, and I'm really pleased with how that's looking. Now I haven't yet glued the top piece into place because I want room to be able to move around in there to add now all of the bits and pieces. But in the next episode we'll be decorating the tree and moving in. So I'll see you then. Take care. Bye.